Due to the graphic nature of this program, viewer discretion is advised.
Hello, everyone. It is the Wednesday, February 25th, 2026 episode of the Marco Duray Show. Thank you for tuning in to hear today's groundbreaking news right here in America and across the board, where the facts are facts and hard truths thrive. Let's begin the best hour of radio, informative, uncensored, unapologetic, and ready to go. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. Let's talk about the State of the Union speech from yesterday evening. I liked it. I have to be honest with you. I liked the speech. I thought it was very nationalistic. I thought it was obviously a very long speech, the longest in American history. I did like several parts of it, though. I like how President Trump, and this is indicative of Trump, he's a showman. I told you he was going to be very showy yesterday. He always is. He'll talk about something that is very important to the Republican cause, the American cause, and he will show you these people so you can see them in person. And that makes a bigger connection to the issue at hand. For example, when he talks about American greatness, then he brings out the men's U.S. hockey team that just won their Olympic gold for the first time since 1980. You see that greatness in the room. You see that honoring. You see how we come together as Americans to embrace these types of achievements. And again, it's a very good moment. And there were several moments like that during the speech. Now, there were several parts that, again, I disagreed with what he said. Obviously, he wasn't being completely factual. And we'll talk about that momentarily. Kevin McCarthy took to X and said that President Trump's State of the Union put America's greatness on full display, celebrating our war heroes, everyday heroes, and our Olympic champions. He's absolutely right about that. He's absolutely right about that. Again, overall, a good speech, but we've got to talk about the very most important fact. What did Americans think about it? Now, it's one thing for political pundits on the right to come out and say, hey, great speech, home run, fantastic, best speech I've ever heard. But what did the American people think about what's going on? What do the American people think about the State of the Union of our nation right now? That's the part that matters about all this. And while many people like the speech, they like what President Trump had to say for the most part, did it resonate with the average American? That's what we have to ask ourselves. And I have to say to myself, I don't think that it did. Because if we look at a current Newsweek polling based on the speech yesterday evening, it did not do very well in terms of Americans as a majority. That's the big problem with this. Take a listen to this from Newsweek.
He was at 44% very positive reaction last year. This year, 38%, even though the universe of speech watchers was actually even a bit more Republican than it was last year. And we also took a look at that very positive speech reaction here compared to previous presidents in this midterm year. So in 2026, this year, tonight, 38% very positive reaction. Joe Biden, 4 years ago, 41% very positive reaction. That was the year Democrats lost control of the House.
Okay, so 38% approval rating of how the speech went. Now, of course, Democrats are going to obviously strike this with a different tone. They're going to talk about President Trump's demeanor during the speech and his positions. You're going to hear the haters for that, no doubt about it. Again, I don't know how many people they polled for this. I don't know if it was 100, 100,000. We don't know. Republican, Democrat, we don't know. But what we have to understand here, the most important part about all this is that did President Trump reach the American people with the issues that are important to them? What do I mean by that? Did he talk about things that are near and dear to us, like the economy? Now, he touched base with some aspects of it. He talked about gas prices being number one. I jotted down here in my notes, gas in Iowa is $1.85 a gallon for unleaded. Wonderful. Wonderful. New mortgage rates are down $5,000 since he took office. Great. We'd like to hear things like that. He talked about inflation being the lowest ever. I don't agree with that, but that's what he talked about. One thing has to happen, though. I told you before, President Trump cannot just be a show and tell candidate. In other words, he tells us everything but shows us nothing. We have to see these results in our own daily lives. That's the whole point of this. We hear about the policy, but is the policy working for the average American? That's the biggest hurdle he's got to get over right now. And he doesn't have very much time because, as I said to you before, the primaries have taken place in several states, and we're seeing a large Democratic turnout. Now, while it was a rah-rah speech, it was again a very good speech, did it resonate with most Americans? We could talk about the stock market hitting 53 record highs since he took office. Great. But how many of you really give a damn how high the Dow Jones is? How many of you are even invested in the Dow Jones? Again, I'm happy about that. Again, as I tell you before, most of that is artificially manufactured to hit those record highs. But we've got to look at what's taking place. Does 70,000, that was his figure, new construction jobs make a difference in your life? It might. But if it's not resonating with you, if it doesn't impact your life, if we're not seeing the opportunities of this golden age of America, as he quoted himself saying, is it going to mean anything for the midterm? We've got to start seeing some of these policies resonate, come to fruition, but I don't think we're seeing that just yet. Again, 2.4 million Americans off food stamps. Great, I'm happy about that. There's 42 million on it, though. That's a problem. I'm glad we're making Trump accounts. The Dell family is investing, $6 billion into it? So any child that's born will have a Trump account. Over time, it will mature into over $100,000. Great, I like that. God knows what the hell inflation will be in 18 years, but I like that. It's good. So there are positives, but the people that he needed to speak to yesterday, the people that were very important, his main focus group should have been Gen Z and millennials. That should be his number one group that he was speaking to. These are the people that are going out en masse and voting now. Yes, he's already got the over 50 crowd. I understand that. He's got them, by the nose. They're going to go out and vote for him. We get that. But what we saw as of late, upon him taking office in 2024, we saw a massive shift of the young vote starting to trickle towards people like Mamdani, people like Wilson in Seattle, people like Abigail Spanberger in Virginia, and Mikey Sherrill in New Jersey. We're seeing all these things taking place right now, and you're saying to yourself, well, if we're in the golden age, if everything is so great, we've got record low inflation, things just can't get any better, why are we seeing this shift over to the Democrats then? You would not expect that if everything was going well. I told you before, we've got to open up opportunities. We've got to make it more cost effective to be entrepreneurs in this country. And we've got to bring the manufacturing and those type of jobs, the jobs that go with it, back to America. We can't just simply rely on tariffs, which again, I told you before, are going to raise prices. That's number one. We've got to start bringing these jobs back to America. If we do not do that, then people think, well, this government just doesn't care about me. I don't see a future for myself. And if that person does not see a future for themselves, what are they going to do? They're going to go towards the communist. Why are they going to go towards the communist, you'd say? That's foolish. Communism leads to so many awful things. Never leads to any prosperity. But if they're offering something like Mamdani did, and by the way, those plans are falling right on their face too because you can't get the funding for it. But if someone's pledging to freeze your rent, free bus rides, free grocery stores, free this, free that, that sounds great to you when you have nothing, when you can't make ends meet. We've got to bring prosperity back to America. And the only way we do that is by building the middle class. How do we build the middle class? That's done through manufacturing. That's done through producing right here in America. That's done through cultivating our own land. Not just relying on imports from other countries, from former American businesses that have outsourced. Thanks again, Bill Clinton. So, Trump needs to be cognizant of this. He's got to be. because that's the issue of what we're facing right now. You know, we could talk about record low border crossings. That's great. We like that. Record low border crossings are fantastic. I like that fentanyl supply is down in America 56%. Now he's talking about oil production being up. He's absolutely right. 19.4 million, million barrels. I almost said billion. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? 19.4 million barrels of oil produced in America every single day. That's more than any other country on earth. America is leading that because of Trump's policies. Those are good policies. That's why we're seeing the cost of gasoline begin to go down. Again, many good parts of this, but there were also parts that I shook my head at. Like, for example, and I knew he was going to bring this up, because I was watching Jesse Waters right before the speech took place, and Katie Miller was on and goes, well, he ended 8 wars. And I said to myself, oh my God. First of all, he didn't end 8 wars. I've already talked about that on the show. He didn't end 8 wars. In fact, none of those conflicts even ended. None of them ended in any type of treaty between the two countries at hand. So the idea that he could go out there and say, I've ended 8 wars, he said, I will make peace wherever I can. And then he kind of brought up the whole issue with Iran very kind of discreetly, if you will. He talked about how he would like to see a deal, but he will never allow them, the number one state sponsor of terror, to have a nuclear weapon. First of all, as I said to you on the show before, they're not the number one state sponsor of terror in the world. Over 80% of that goes to these little factions. Again, they're Muslim factions. They're Sunni factions. But that's ISIS, that's Al-Qaeda, that's the Taliban. Groups like that are causing these terrorist acts. And he's equating that with Iran, but Iran does not do that. Now, that doesn't mean Iran is perfect. But the idea that they're the number one state sponsor of terror, that's just a talking point that's, again, baseless by anyone that pays attention to it. So, again, I didn't like that part of it. He said last June he obliterated Iran's nuclear weapons program. Okay, then why the hell are we in the North Arabian Sea right now? Why do we have ships now in the Mediterranean? Why are we waging a war that is not approved by Congress to go and attack a foreign country that has never attacked us before, that has never even threatened our national security? Can he explain that to us? And by the way, he was very discreet about his position on moving forward with Iran. But he said, I will make peace wherever I can. Well, then why are we working for peace? Why are we bombing in Yemen? Why are we allowing the Israelis to continue to run roughshod over Gaza and inside the West Bank? And fire missiles into 7 different countries. Why are we doing that? They're doing it with our military equipment. One of the other things that President Trump said was that energy prices are going down. That's not true either. They're up about 9 to 10% overall, year over year. I didn't like that part. One of the things he said, too, was that we put America first. So I like this part. We put America first. I want America to be first. You want America to be first. We want our interests to be very upfront and up close. That's what we should be working for. Now, how could that be when every time Netanyahu comes to the White House, he gets everything he wants? We're only in this region is because Netanyahu wants us there. And again, he's using these talking points, the Israeli talking points, the number one state sponsor of terror. Israel has conducted far more terror attacks on its neighboring countries than Iran has. That's just a fact, folks. You can go look that up. One of the latest ones, aside from what's taking place in Gaza right now, was that beeper attack inside Lebanon, where they were targeting Hezbollah, so-called. And in the process, there were innocent people killed. There were hundreds of other people injured. That is a terror attack. And yet our former CIA chief, or director, I guess you call him, Mike Pompeo, said this was one of the greatest things he's ever seen. Lindsey Graham was foaming at the mouth. How wonderful it was. I mean, this is what Mike Huckabee, of course, good old Mike Huckabee. I mean, that guy, that Israel can do anything they want. Mike Huckabee will go, this is fantastic. This is wonderful. I mean, it's in the Bible. That's Mike Huckabee for you. a jerk, a moron, a liar. Anyways, I digress. Now, he did say one thing, President Trump, yesterday. He said, very unfortunate ruling with the tariffs. So he's referring, of course, to SCOTUS. He said tariffs are saving, they are peace-protecting tariffs, is what he was talking about. And of course, he's hinting to the new global tariffs. He mentioned that yesterday. Hints at removing the federal income tax, which I didn't understand because he has never put any legislation forth towards doing that. He was right, though. Tariffs did help build this country. But when they were issued by President McKinley, we didn't have a federal income tax. That was the only tax you were really paying. So you were getting 100% of what you earned from your job. Any wages that you earned, you kept right in your pocket. And it would be in the taxes through the tariffs, and again, because the cost of the goods go up, that you would be paying for what we're seeing now with these imports. That was the case. But right now, we're not seeing that. Because now you're getting a higher consumer price index. We're taxed all across the board. Your federal income taxes have never been higher. And, you know, we have state income tax, property tax, sales tax to the max. These things have got to come down, folks. We've got to, again, the tariffs are what's causing the CPI to go up. And if he wants to start bringing down prices, which again, most Americans would agree they want, then you'll start to see things change in terms of optimism in this country. But if prices are up 15% on every import coming in, and we're heavily reliant on these imports, you're going to be paying 15% more for those products. So we've got to understand this. But again, you see people on the right, these tariffs are great, look at the money we're bringing in. Yeah, but the money you're bringing in, and he said yesterday, you know, we're taking this money in from these companies, the middlemen as well, but it's translating over to you. And that's the one thing you need to understand. Those prices come to you in the term of fees being paid at the store for those goods. Otherwise, those companies are going to go out of business. They're going to start losing profits. And obviously, they're not going to do that. They're going to, again, translate that price over to you, the consumer. That's the way it always works, out of your own pocket. That's why these goods are going up. He did talk about AI demands driving up electricity prices, and he did talk about AI companies building their own power grids through power plants, which I thought was interesting. They're going to start building their own. That way they don't take away from our own supply. Talked about the 401k balance is up $30,000, being way up. He wanted to talk about stopping insider trading inside Congress. Yes, that would be great. I think Nancy Pelosi even decided to stand up for that one, which was hilarious. He talked about barring states from issuing commercial driver's license to illegal aliens. And he had that young girl and her father there. Her family was hit by an 18-wheeler. She was not even supposed to really be alive. And, of course, he names a bill after her. Those are things, again, that Trump shows the people that, yes, he does care about public safety, law and order, immigration. We're talking about the lowest border crossings right now in American history. I mean, these things are ways in which people can resonate to. He talked about the big, beautiful bill, no tax on tips, overtime, and he had the woman who was earning some $5,000 more in 2025 as a result of this. That's $5,000 more in your pocket. That is a good policy. That's a policy that can work. So there are people that, again, like what Trump is doing, but it's got to start resonating on a higher level. That's what I'm telling you, because people are the way the economy's been, because we had 4 years of Joe Biden, where we had literally no growth. Like mine at the time, Gavin Newsom. And it destroyed many small businesses. It destroyed education. So there's a lot that needs to be done. And while Trump said that he did inherit most of this, absolutely, we still have 3% more inflation than we did in his last term. We still have higher consumer price indexes because of the policies really relating to these tariffs and other policies coming out of D.C. There's no doubt about that. But, you know, overall, the one thing I really didn't understand from the Democrats, and by the way, we had 73 Democrats skipping the State of the Union yesterday. No shock there. No shock there. No Dem stood up after President Trump said that we should not be protecting illegal aliens. Did you see that? And again, I don't like that President Trump has to call that out when he's there. But I like that the visual display of, hey, one side is standing up for the American people. And in fact, I think his actual quote was, stand up if your first duty is to protect American citizens, not illegal aliens. Not one Democrat stood up. How could you as a sane voter sit there and go, this is great. I need to vote for that person. It doesn't seem to make any sense at all. Really, it doesn't. I don't understand these people either, by the way. It makes no sense to me how you can run for office and your commitment is to choose illegal aliens over American citizens, the people that are here to elect you. Isn't that a slap in the face? And by the way, he had Irina Zarutka's family that was there, speaking about the justice for her, and a bill now that he will push forth to make sure that repeat offenders like the scum that murdered her, that I think she was on a subway on the way home, stabbed her in the neck, left her for dead. These type of people need to be behind bars, folks, not out on the streets. Did any Democrats stand up for that? Not a one. And by the way, she's an immigrant. She's from Ukraine. She's from war-torn Ukraine. I saw a bunch of Democrats with the Ukrainian flag on their lapels, for God's sakes. Why not stand up? This is the part I don't understand with them. Where is this disconnect? Well, you can't show that you're supportive of the U.S. hockey team, for God's sakes? You can't show that you support a grieving mother? Or World War II veterans being honored for their commitment to this country, their dedication, their sacrifice? I don't understand this. But this is the Democratic Party. They don't care about these things. Their loyalty is to illegal aliens. It doesn't make any sense. But yet somehow, some way, they continue to get in office. Gee, I wonder why. By the way, President Trump said that D.C. is down close to 100%. Now, I haven't checked that exact statistic, but we have known that the law and order inside D.C. is getting much, much better, and crime is dropping, which I'm very, very happy to see. So, while there were some things where I had to shake my head at, for example, also he talked about the last administration only bringing in $1 trillion of investments. And of course, President Trump gave you the line that $18 trillion in 1 year were committed to be invested from foreign countries into the United States. Now, I said to myself, I've talked this point over with you so many times, so you all know this by now. We talked about the 8 wars being ended. I went through a whole show on that. How they're all still up and running. There's still this conflict in those regions. Again, I commend President Trump for bringing people together, but to sit there and go, hey, yeah, I stopped 8 wars, when they're not ended, when they didn't end in any type of treaty between the countries, is not ending the wars. And again, I love the diplomacy. I do. I like that he steps up and cares about these things. But the idea that he ended these wars is another thing. And by the way, the $18 trillion of investments isn't happening. We haven't seen one dime spent anywhere in the United States yet. All we have is their word. And that, again, could change because of these new tariffs he's putting in. They could say, you know what, the hell with you. You're going to put 15% tariffs on our goods coming into your country? All right, then we're not going to invest this $100 billion. We're not going to invest this $50 billion, whatever it may be. Again, we have to see this translate. If he had said, hey, we've got $18 trillion of investments, we've got 17 brand new manufacturing plants up and running in X, Y, and Z states, bringing in so much more revenue into these cities, creating X number of good-paying jobs over X number of dollars, that's what the American people want to hear. This is exactly what they want to hear. And that was not delivered to them. This is what the young people are looking for, though. Mark my words, this is what they want. Okay, so we've got to be very aware of this, and President Trump should be as well. He missed a great opportunity to really sell his policy, but a lot of it is because it's not really translating to what it should be. And while we have different areas where, yes, things are positive, yes, things are improving some costs going down, I'm not denying that. But it's not at the level that we need it to be. It's not at the level where people can look and say, yes, this government's working for me. I'm seeing this translate to my own wallet. I'm saving even more money by voting for this government. This policy is helping me in such a way. So all these things, they have to be translated. And there's no other way around that except for actually the American people seeing that. Now, I will say President Trump, and I'll conclude this speech with this before we go on to the other State of the Union speech that was spoken about yesterday. By the way, Joy Reid fell right in her face on that. I was so happy to see that. But they had a protest, I think, somewhere in D.C., and of course, it wasn't very well received. I'll just put it to you that way. But here's President Trump. This is one of his closing remarks. I want to play this for you because, again, the way that he sums up, the way that he concluded was excellent, by the way. Very, very good. Again, it makes us remember why we are Americans and why we're so blessed to be Americans. Listen to the way he ended his speech yesterday.
250 years is a long in the life of a nation, but in another sense, it's really a mere moment in the eye of history. Two of the gentlemen we met in the gallery this evening took their first breaths 1 century ago, 100 years before that, on July 4th, 1826, the author of the Declaration of Independence, brilliant, Thomas Jefferson, drew his last breath. Just a single long human lifespan separates the giants who declared and won our independence from the heroes who stand among us tonight. Everything our nation has done, everything we have achieved, has been the work of those few great lifetimes. In those brief chapters, Americans built this nation from 13 humble colonies into the pinnacle of human civilization and human freedom, the strongest, wealthiest, most powerful, most successful nation in all of history.
That is a remarkable statement to make. And it's really remarkable when you think about it, too. We actually consider that 100 years ago, these men that we're honoring today were born. But just 100 years ago from when they were born, our founding fathers were, some of them had passed, of course, but many of them were still alive. Many of them were still serving this country to build it into what it is today. That's a remarkable statement when you really think about it. Look how much this country has grown in the last 250 years. It's remarkable. And he's absolutely right. It grew into one of the greatest nation on earth. To me, that was a brilliant statement at the end. It really, really was. And it shows the potential for the future of this country. Yes, there are many things we can still achieve in this country, should we put our minds to it. We've got to get back to that, though. We've got to get the economy so where people can obviously innovate more on their own. We've got to get our education back on track because it's nowhere near where it needs to be. Not even close. And I was a little bit shocked he didn't say anything about education yesterday, about the student walkouts and the protests. I think he was trying to avoid the ICE issue overall. I think that's why he said that. But I would have liked to have heard him say something like, listen, we need to improve our education again. We've got to get our public schools back to performing #1 across the globe. I've heard reports were 24. I've heard reports were 36, depending on the source. We've got to get back to the #1 status. That's what needs to happen. We need to get our population back up and running in that aspect. Because when you have a creative mind, when you have the tools to do that, which again are brought to you by education, you're able to innovate again. The mind expands. We grow. We develop. Where ingenuity is just through the roof. And that's what we saw for much of the early parts of the 20th century in this country. We saw massive innovations. We saw massive growth. We saw massive development. And we led the world in this. I want to play you one more clip for, again, part of this conclusion, because, again, it was so brilliant. I love this part of the speech, actually. But take a listen to, again, how President Trump concluded before he ended his speech yesterday.
When the world needs courage, daring, vision, and inspiration, it is still turning to America. And when God needs a nation to work his miracles, he knows exactly who to ask. There is no challenge Americans cannot overcome, no frontier too vast for us to conquer, no dream too bold for us to chase, no horizon too distant for us to claim. For our destiny is written by the hand of Providence, and these first 250 years were just the beginning. From the rugged border towns of Texas to the heartland villages of Michigan, from the sun-kissed shores of Florida to the endless fields of the Dakotas, and from the historic streets of Philadelphia to right here in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., the golden age of America is upon us. The revolution that began in 1776 has not ended. It still continues because the flame of liberty and independence still burns in the heart of every American patriot. And our future will be bigger, better, brighter, bolder, and more glorious than ever before. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless America.
What a way to end the speech, though. What a way to end that speech. That same energy, that same wisdom, that same light still burns deep within inside every single American patriot. I mean, to me, that was, again, a great way to end everything. I thought it was very, very well done. Those are the parts of the speech that are fantastic. When it really gets going into the patriotic side of this country, what we can do. I played you President Nixon just yesterday. Same, similar attitude, and that's what makes these speeches so profound, so wonderful. We can look back and say, yes, we are Americans. There's nothing we can't not do. And we need to get back to that. We need to get the young people's minds back to that. We need to get the country growing again. We need to get the country producing again. We need to lead in those fronts, not back away from them. Again, we've had many, many bad trade deals over the years. We've outsourced many great jobs, which again was fairly ridiculous. But we need to get back to that. And I think President Trump, if he puts his mind to it, can really do that. He's got to get away from just focusing on what's taking place with what Israel wants. That's number one. He's got to stop doing that. There's no need for it. There's really no necessity for it. People don't want it. But he's got to understand, he's looking at a very low approval rating right now. Only about 40% of Americans would like to see what he's doing continue. And again, this is mostly probably the much older crowd. Younger Americans are moving away from that. By the way, they're the ones that helped elect him too, by the way. He needs to understand that. So you can't just blow that part over. You've got to understand he's got to do both. He's got to make really a 20-point swing from where he is right now if he wants to keep the House in this midterm. And again, I said people are already going to the polls right now. We're seeing a massive turnout even in a red state like Texas. So he's got to be aware of this. These policies have got to start to come together very, very soon if he really wants to keep the House. If his main goal is to do whatever Israel wants, then he's going to lose everything, especially if he starts a war. Americans, by and large, do not want a war with Iran. They don't want it. They're not concerned about it. That's nothing in their purview. It doesn't benefit the United States at all. They don't want it. They don't want it. So, again, he's going to have a lot of issues, too, if he does this, because the economies are going to crumble worldwide. That's nothing beneficial to the United States, especially for trade, and especially when we're very, very dependent on a lot of these countries for their goods. Virginia Governor Abigail Spanberger, whom I cannot stand, by the way, she offered a sharp contrast to President Trump's depiction of the nation as being sold as the Golden Age just after he spoke yesterday evening. She spoke for about 13 minutes, and she kind of lambasted him for several remarks that he made. And, you know, she's one of these people that ran on one set of issues, and then, of course, she does the exact opposite when she comes into the office. And yet she's talking about President Trump and his promises, which, again, I find very remarkable. You'll see why momentarily. But she started off by saying Democrats across the country are laser-focused on affordability in our nation's capital and in state capitals and communities across the country. Okay, fine. That makes sense. I'm one for that. I'm very much involved in that. I'd like to see that. But then she goes on and says, as we celebrate 250 years since America declared our independence from tyranny, I can think of no better place to speak to you. So she's trying to equate herself, I guess, with freedom, justice, the Constitution. Yet she's an ardent communist. She's Gavin Newsom light. Okay? That's all she is. Now, Spanberger said she wanted to plainly and honestly, we'll get to why that's not necessarily true, speak to the people watching at home. She structured her speech around a series of direct questions. Here are some of them. Is the president working to make life more affordable for you and your family? Let's talk about this. Let's break this down. That's a fair question, by the way. Let's take a look at it. Under President Trump, you've got gas prices that have dropped significantly with national averages in 2026 below the $3 threshold. He talked about how Iowa's gas, when he was last there, was $1.85 for unleaded. That's obviously much lower. Under Joe Biden, his average gas price across the country was just over $5 a gallon for unleaded. So clearly we've seen prices go down in terms of the transportation costs. Okay, so that's obviously a big plus for President Trump. Probably that's one of his biggest pluses right then and there. We have seen energy costs, though, go up in terms of for heating this winter. We've had a very cold winter. They're up on average, though, 9 to 10%. So he did say during his speech that energy prices went down. They have not. I forecast that to you back in December. And, of course, right now they're telling you how gas prices, utility prices have gone up. No shock there. So the lower gas prices are the biggest achievement for President Trump, I would have to say. And that's something, obviously, he should have honed in on. We've got certain grocery prices have dropped as well for some items. We've seen egg prices, which, again, he highlighted this, have seen a sharp drop. He said 60%. I've seen as much as 90%. Pork products, although I never recommend you to eat pork at all, those prices have dropped. We've got dairy products also dropping, packaged goods dropping. We're still seeing beef and poultry and coffee prices, among other necessities, still up. And again, I know there's still a lot of work to do in this arena too, because food prices are up overall. So that's something he's got to work on, but some have dropped significantly. We look at prescription drug costs. Prices are falling in some areas after the most favored nations legislation that he put forth. Consumer savings with the Trump RX program, which again are intended to help lower the cost of out-of-pockets for the many people, for these patients. And let's not forget, by the way, let's just never forget this. Obamacare costs significantly rose just between 2013 and 2017. This is what President Trump is dealing with, too, by the way. Awful legislation throughout the last 16 or so years. From 2013 to 2017, this is before President Trump even took office, individual premiums rose 100 to 200% on average for an individual program. That's not even a family program, which is obviously much higher. Who would have thought that the government single-payer healthcare would cost so much, right? This is socialized medicine. This is communism. And it's not cheaper. Why it was called the Affordable Care Act, I have no idea. It should have been called the Unaffordable Care Act. That's what it was. Good old Obama. Oh, there you go. Good old Hussein Obama. And everyone just loved it. They still love it. They're still fighting for it. And that's why your premiums are up so much. And again, they're up even higher now. From 2017 to 2026, they're obviously up. So think about it. You're paying 3-digit increases in your health care since Obamacare took place, which is supposed to save you money. You know, and Spanberger wants to lecture Trump on affordability? Look what her party did to health care prices. It's unbelievable. We also can look at things like housing-related costs. Mortgage rates have fallen to their lowest level since 2022, allowing more people to buy homes. And while I will say that the average median price of homes is still very, very high, these mortgage rates being dropped will help people buy homes. It will help them buy homes. Again, it's not where it's supposed to be. We've got supply and demand issues with housing. A lot of that tends to be state-related. President Trump also stopped these big investment firms like State Street, BlackRock, and Vanguard from purchasing up single-family homes. These are big things because that's what we're seeing very early on here. So that's another arena. We're also seeing apartment rents declining for the 6 straight months. We're seeing it reaching the lowest level in 4 years. Vacancy rates are rising, which also helps for that supply and demand issue as well. So what's the big takeaway from this? Yes, we've got inflation cut in half. We're seeing real wages beginning to go up. They're not growing with the current rate of inflation, though. That's the big problem. We saw massive inflation under Joe Biden. 25 to 30% increases by the time he got out of office. Now, they'll look at, for example, 1 year and say, look, it went up 9.1%. Okay, but it also went up several percentage points every single year he was in office. By the time he got out of office, everything excluding things like food and energy prices, which were also skyrocketing. So that inflation wasn't just that 9.1% for that year over year. It was actually much higher than that. And that cost also offshoots to other things because you're shipping those goods to market. So we've got to be very clear about inflation. Yes, it's only 3% under Trump. It's much lower than what it was. But those goods are still 3% more than what they were just a year ago. That's the part you have to understand. And those prices need to come down significantly to get people back up and running. That's what people want to see. Now, does this mean that President Trump has solved all these problems that Joe Biden did during his blunder of a presidency for the economy? Of course not. There's still lots more to do. But why are we listening to Abigail Spanberger? She's a moron. She's a CIA plant on the issue of affordability and direction of the nation now. This is what we need to listen to? We need to listen to her? She's been a governor for what? Just over a month now? This is the same woman, by the way, that while in Congress voted with Joe Biden on all these disastrous policies. Guess how much, folks? Yep, I'll tell you. I got the answer right here. 100% of the time. This idiot voted with Joe Biden 100% of the time. That picture of her wearing a bag over her head in Congress isn't just a facade. She is a moron. She is a liar. That's who this woman is, okay? That's who she is. And the fact that she can come out here and say all these things as if she's the light at the end of the hill is another thing. I really don't believe this, to be honest with you. Look at this. It says here that analysts have warned now that Spanberger's affordability agenda may actually raise costs. Well, no kidding. Everything she voted for when she was in Congress caused prices to increase. Why would anything change when she's governor? What do you think? She has some ultimate wisdom now all of a sudden that she's running things? And also know that Virginia's energy prices have already elevated due to the 2020 Clean Economy Act, and nothing in this early agenda reverses these costs. Okay, so nothing's going to change there. Political reporting shows affordability remains a top concern, but no evidence of falling prices. So again, there's no trajectory that says this policy is going to a lower cost for whatever. You look at the cost of living data for 2026 showing Virginia remains extremely expensive. You're looking at record high cost of living index for 2026, rent, groceries, utilities, transportation, healthcare, showing no indication at all of any broad decline of these prices. None whatsoever. So the bottom line is, there's no evidence that she's doing anything for Virginians. In fact, she's done 180s on several different issues, by the way. She ran on one set of issues, and she does the exact opposite. I told you before, she's Gavin Newsom. She's Gavin Newsom light. And while she can come out there with a smile on her face and talk about affordability and what Trump said, she's not one to talk. That's the only point I'll make there. And by the way, I criticized several things that President Trump said. I'm not opposed to that, but why do I need to listen to her? She's done nothing to help Virginia ease its affordability problems at all. And in fact, they're probably going to get much, much worse moving forward. So we've got to be aware of all these things. That these are all issues that are facing the average American. And while she's talking about Mikey Sherrill, herself, winning these offices, we've got to understand some things. The government was shut down at a very opportune time, wasn't it? The government got shut down. We saw, obviously, many of these people reside in Virginia. And they went the way of the Democratic Party. That's not a shock there. So, we look at these things. We see these things from Abigail Spanberger. again, Virginia's going to be a mess very, very soon. And she's going to do everything she can to stall ICE, stall working with immigration, all these things. And it's only going to get much, much worse as time goes on. That's just a fact, folks. By the way, President Trump now has vowed to require proof of citizenship to vote, which, again, we all want. He says if Congress does not act, he will use executive order. I don't think that'll work. I really don't. I think he needs Congress to act for him. So while I think this is a good issue, and again, he alluded to the SAVE Act, that obviously we should use proper voter ID as a means to vote in the midterm elections. I don't think he can simply just write this off as a requirement without congressional approval. I don't think that's going to work. He needs Congress to act on this. And that's why Mike Johnson and John Thune need to get this going very, very soon. They can't let this wait. So the SAVE Act needs to be passed. And, of course, the legislation would require proof of citizenship to register to vote, mandate photo ID for in-person voting. And, by the way, all in-person voting should be taking place. And direct states to remove non-citizens from voter rolls. Absolutely 100%. By the way, these people need to be removed from the country, too, by the way. I'll just put it to you that way. All right, moving on as well. Trump said Iran wants to make a deal more than the United States. He says that Iran wants to make a deal more than the United States. The U.S. and Iran are expected to hold a third round of nuclear talks on Thursday in Geneva. Now, again, I told you this war is going to happen. Whether we want this to happen or not, I do believe this war is going to happen. I still believe that. You don't send an entire fleet out surrounding Iran if you're not going to do anything, just for show and tell. They're there for a strict purpose, and that is for an invasion at the most opportune time. It's going to happen sooner or later. It really is. Now, we got to understand a couple things here, though. In recent developments, what we have found out now, General Dan Cain, right, they call him Raising Cain. Fantastic. They named him after a chicken restaurant, for God's sakes. Anyways, he's the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And he probably might be one of the only sane voices of reason in the entire President Trump's circle here, along with maybe Tulsi Gabbard, J.D. Vance, that really have expressed their concerns about this unprovoked invasion. What Cain expressed, though, clearly, was that we have a lack of munitions and support from our allies that could mean more danger for the United States and our troops in the region. Well, no kidding. Again, I still can't believe we are openly talking about a war with Iran and Congress is just silent on the matter. Where are the checks and balances? Why hasn't Mike Johnson acted on this? Why isn't anybody, Democrats or Republicans alike, trying to hold President Trump accountable for this unprovoked attack that's going to lead to mass chaos? And that mass chaos, of course, is the destruction of global economies. That's not beneficial for the United States as well. This is not going to be a walk in the park. Okay, this is not going to be a cakewalk like the media is trying to sell to you, or something great like the media is going to say to you. Most of the people like the Lindsey Grahams of the world, right, the beta males like him, that want this war are simply doing this on behalf of Israel. The guy goes to Israel every 2 weeks, the schmuck. I hope he stays there. By the way, it's going to take more than a couple days. It'll probably take weeks and months of constant barrage of missiles to hit for any type of meaningful exchange. Even then, I don't think we would be able to take out the Iranian government as is. They're far too strong. They've got hypersonic missiles now. We know that they use, I think, 1 or 2 of them in the war with Israel, the 12-day war last June. They have a whole new arsenal. They've been building up ever since then, and they are anticipating this. They know where their targets are. Russia has also provided them with different types of munitions, weapons, attack helicopters, you name it. They're all working together. And by the way, Russia and China are not going to let Iran just simply fall. If they need to enter this conflict in some way to support or bolster up Iran, they will do that. They will simply do that. Here's the main point, though. President Trump is in too deep on this. He will not disavow what Netanyahu or the Israel lobby wants. That's the problem with what all this is taking place. Now, in his State of the Union, Trump said that Iran wants to make a deal, but we haven't heard those secret words, we will never have a nuclear weapon. First of all, they've said this time and time again. I know I say this all the time on the show, but they've never said they've had a nuclear weapon. They've said constantly they don't want a nuclear weapon. They have an edict from the supreme leader. They will not build a nuclear weapon based on their own religion. So the U.S. and Iran are expected to hold talks tomorrow in Geneva, and the focus is on the nuclear weapons program. Trump says, my preference is to solve this problem through diplomacy. Fine. But they're not going to do away with all their enrichment. They're simply not going to do that. And that's what President Trump wants. They're also not going to do away with their entire ballistic missile program. That's what Netanyahu wants, because he doesn't want any type of attack to be taking place on Israeli soil. It's just the way it is. And of course, they're not going to stop their support of groups like Hezbollah. They're simply just not going to do it. They understand what Israel is in the region, and that is a threat to their own sovereignty. They saw this last June. Just ask Lebanon, just ask Syria, just ask Iraq, just ask Yemen, just ask the Gazans, just ask the Palestinians in the West Bank, just ask Turkey. All these things are a major, major concern for these countries. They know, though, if they take out Iran, that the biggest obstacle in the Middle East will be taken out, though. And that's why they want regime change. That's why they want Pahlavi. This is why all these things are taking place right now. So, not a good thing. Not a good thing. I would like to see the diplomacy in this. Obviously, I don't know how many times they have to tell us that they don't have a nuclear weapon and they want to trade with us to President Trump, but he's not buying it because they're not interested in diplomacy. Now, he says that, but he's not. You wouldn't send an entire fleet there before negotiations if your intention wasn't to conduct a war. I'll just say it to you like that, folks. So Trump is saying one thing, but of course he means the exact opposite. They were in talks last June, and he did away with them. And he allowed that. And I think that was a grave mistake in his first term. Excuse me, his first year of his second term, rather. We got to look, too, at oil futures. This is out of the Wall Street Journal. This is oil futures, little change as market awaits U.S.-Iran talks. So again, they're waiting to see what takes place, if a deal would be struck. I don't think it will be. But you won't see the markets really start to respond completely until you see this war really take place. You're seeing Brent crude holding near $71 a barrel, but the volatility is still elevated. You're still seeing prices going up. Brent crude rose 0.6% to $71.02 a barrel, while the West Texas Intermediate is up 0.5% to $65.66 a barrel. We'll talk more about this on Friday, but you're seeing things starting to shift. You're seeing the markets responding. They're anticipating this war, and they should, because it's going to happen. And once that happens, you're going to see that price of oil really, really start to skyrocket. Once you see it hit $100 to $120 a barrel, you'll see gas prices more than double. So President Trump can wipe out that entire success that he's had with lowering gas prices. It doesn't matter if we're energy independent, because the world global supply is going to be so reduced because of this. You're going to see those prices go up. So we have to keep an eye on this, and these gas prices are going to go up significantly, folks. Let's talk, too, about the cartel violence right now, which is greatly disrupting Mexico's trade corridors with the United States. You know, we think that just because it happens over the southern border, it's not a big issue for us. Well, it is. It's a major issue when you have one of the leading terror groups, one of the biggest drug cartels in Mexico, working with rattling the logistics network, disrupting ports, airports, and, of course, key inland freight corridors critical to U.S.-Mexico trade. And just so we're clear on this, folks, Mexico is our number one trading partner. I know we like to think it's China. China's number two. They also import a lot, but Mexico imports much more in the United States than China does. And China imports, I believe, it's 32% of the overall imports that come into the United States. So this is no good. This is no good as well. But this is what's happening as a result of this taking out of El Mencho. What a name for somebody, right? El Mencho. Now, in the aftermath, the cartel-linked groups now erected road blockades, set vehicles ablaze, disrupted transportation corridors all across Jalisco, and several other Mexican states. We saw this in 20 different states all throughout the country. They've got several different ports that are currently closed as of Sunday. You got Guadalajara's airport facing severe disruptions. You got cargo flight cancellations that are taking place. Customs operations inside Guadalajara. They're all being halted, and this is affecting trade with us. Mexico's security cabinet later reported road blockades in Jalisco have been reported cleared, though 65 blockades were initially reported after Sunday's violence. So there's a lot going on. We're seeing, of course, American citizens still kind of being trapped at various different resorts and what have you. And, of course, we're praying for their safety as well, and, of course, for the safety of the Mexican people as well. Nobody should have to live like this. You know, Trump did mention this during his State of the Union. He talked about how these are, terrorist groups, and they are. They are wreaking terror all across these different states in Mexico right now. The government just simply will not stand up to them because they don't have really the power to do so, and these groups are really just almost like paramilitary groups within inside the country. And they are ruthless, and they will take control, and they will terrorize people. And as a result of that, you're seeing the trade imbalance between the U.S. and Mexico taking place right now in various different transit issues and what have you. It's a very, very awful thing to see taking place right now. All the more reason to secure your border, though. All the more reason to put as many people as you can on the border to stop these people from, again, crossing back and forth in the United States with their proxies inside the United States right now, which, by and large, are other illegal aliens, just so we understand this. All right, let's go through one more thing today. We got a couple minutes remaining in the broadcast. I hate when these shows go by so quick, don't you? I'm talking, and all of a sudden I look at my clock, and I see I got 2 minutes remaining. Okay, well, we'll get through this as quickly as I can. This is in Russia Today, and it just, again, reiterates what we were talking about yesterday. It says, Moscow will respond if NATO gives nukes to Nazi regime in Kiev, is what Dmitry Medvedev said. It said France and the UK are now considering covertly handing nuclear capabilities or a dirty bomb to Kiev. That's what Russia Intel is now figuring out. Well, it's not a shock. This is what they've talked about. It said Russia would launch a nuclear response. This is where we are right now. In a time where we're supposed to get peace and an end to these conflicts, we're getting more and more conflict building up. Tensions are rising. How stupid could the UK, of course, look at who leads it. Sir Keir Starmer. Look at that guy. And, of course, little macaroni over there in France. Unbelievable. And why would they do this at a time when the war is going to be ending soon? Russia said they would launch a nuclear response if NATO countries supplied atomic weapons to Ukraine. That's what the former president, Dmitry Medvedev, has said. He now sits on the Russian Security Council and was commenting to Russia Today on Tuesday on claims of Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service that London and Paris are now considering ways to provide nuclear weaponry or related components to Kiev. I will be blunt and say the obvious. An intention by the UK and France to hand over nuclear capabilities to the Nazi regime in Kiev would change the situation entirely. This is a direct transfer of nuclear weapons to a country at war that is supposed to be neutral. So, are we going to see an all-out war now take place because of these idiots inside of UK and France? Is this what we're going to see? You can't make this stuff up, folks. You really can't. The fact that they would even consider doing this is beyond foolish. Why would they do this? At a time like this when the war is going to be coming to an end, hopefully soon. Obviously, we'd like to see that. But this just adds so much more conflict to the region. And of course, if NATO gets involved, then we have a greater regional war, folks. And we're already looking at a greater regional war inside the Middle East right now. Scary times ahead of us, folks. So the only thing we can really do is pray for this. Folks, thanks again for being today. Hope you enjoyed this show. Hope you'll share with others. And, of course, make sure you're keeping your mind strong, everything stored up. I'll see you tomorrow on the next Marco Dre Show. Be good. God bless.